have some book recommendations for fantasy that is not based on medieval Europe. Fantasy has been changing a lot in recent times, and I think it's a lot easier to find even epic fantasy that's not based on medieval Europe. But for the recommendations in this video, I'm only going to recommend ones that I have personally read within the last year or two. One of these is maybe pushing it a little bit, so I will not do that one first. First, I will start with The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. I read this one over the summer and really enjoyed it. This one is based in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. I might have the century wrong, but in a long ago time in a faraway place, a retired pirate mom goes back to sea and has some magical adventures. It has a good hefty amount of magical elements the whole way through, but I felt like that grew a whole bunch in the second half of the book. And this is also a good recommendation if you like a main character that's a little on the older side. Not old, like in her 40s, I think. And it just has a very different feel and flavor from a lot of the classic fantasy that I have read and that I have back here on my shelves. It's also a good seafaring fantasy. It has that piratical feel. Piratical, nautical. My next suggestion, the one that I'm not sure really fits, the one that might be pushing this idea a little bit, but I read it last month and loved it, and that is His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. It is in Europe, but not medieval times. It's during the Napoleonic Wars, but I just loved the Dragon Temeraire. I loved Lawrence the human. I loved the relationship between the two, the character growth, the emotional connection between them. There's scenes where they have to train, as any good dragon rider book has. And then the dragons and their riders have to fight. They are at war. And the way that they fight is very interesting. There's not really heavy fantasy elements, the main one being that there are dragons. The dragons are treated like airships, so they have a crew, not just the one rider. They fire weaponry from the dragons' backs, and some dragons have special abilities that make them far more valuable in the war effort. Anyway, I really loved it, and I'm probably going to recommend this to most people most of the time. And it's the first in a little bit of a longer series, which is exciting to me. I've only read the first one so far, but I'm looking forward to reading the rest. Next, The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. It feels like I read it so long ago, but it was just earlier this year. This one is a lot more Asian inspired and feels like it pulls a lot of inspiration from ancient, what do you call it? Japan, when the samurai were in full flower. But that samurai-like inspiration is just on the one peninsula that these characters live on. The rest of the world is a lot more modernized. So it's like if modern Japan met ancient samurai Japan. I know there's a word I'm looking for. This is how you can tell I just sat down to record without preparing a whole bunch ahead of time. It's also not told in a very normal storytelling way. I felt like the main crescendo of the story was in the middle, and then there was still a lot more with the, like, when something catastrophic happens in your life, what comes next? The main character, Misaki, is, again, older. I think she's younger in the book than I am right now. But she is an adult woman who is also a mom, and she is dealing with things like war and her place in the world and her place in her family. But there's also a lot of really cool fighting. I would say the magical fantasy element is maybe medium. And my last recommendation, I'm kind of cheating because it's more than one, and that is The Secret Projects by Brandon Sanderson that came out last year, 2023, except for The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. The other three, and to be honest, most of Sanderson's writing anyway, he really tries to stray away from that really classic medieval England setting and do things a lot more strange and weird. The nice thing about these is that they're kind of set apart. None of them are part of a longer series, although these three here are part of the Cosmere as a whole, which is the large universe that Sanderson has created, basically the MCU, but Sanderson's creation. I will say, of these three, the Sunlit Man requires the most previous knowledge of the Cosmere, at least the Stormlight Archive. If you have not read it, this will still be a good story, although not as impactful. This one takes place on a small little planet where the sun burns up the earth every day, and as it rotates, it kind of remakes itself, the side that's facing away from the sun. And so the entire population is nomadic, on the move, constantly. They cannot stop ever, or the sun will get them. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is also a one of, inspired, I don't think quite as much by Asian culture as much as it is by video games and manga that are Asian inspired. And Tress of the Emerald Sea, just a simple adventure with a journey. Main character is off looking for her lost love on the Spore Seas. All of these worlds are very different and unique in true Sanderson fashion, and I think worth giving a try, especially if you want to try a Sanderson book but aren't sure if you want to start the wider world and the huge series that he has. I hope these suggestions were helpful, and feel free to put more suggestions in the comments for the benefit of those people who are looking for these recommendations. Thank you to my patrons. I'll put a link to my Patreon and my Instagram in the description. Happy reading. Bye.